record button and take it away, Brad. Can you hear me, Brad?
Yeah, Gary, hold on a second. Trying to get my screen back.
No.
All right. Thanks, Gary. And hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here today to give you an update on diadromous fish in Massachusetts. And I'm going to do so from my perspective as diadromous fish project leader for this project. And what I'm going to do today is give you an update on these topics here. And I am going to highlight the Boston Harbor region because there's a lot going on recently for restoration in the region. There's a lot of potential projects that could come up in the upcoming years that could be very beneficial for these species. Then I want to run into the river herring stock assessment for Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And this will lead into discussion on our river herring counts here in Massachusetts, and then finish up with some diadromous fish restoration projects that are occurring now in Massachusetts. And so a little bit about the project. We have a project that focuses on fish passage and habitat restoration, as well as fish biology and management. The origins go quite a ways back to the 1930s and 1940s, when state laws established DMF as the regulatory authority to manage these coastal fish runs. And this included creating the Diadromous Fish Fishway Crew in 1934, so we're in our 90th year. And the focus for many years was to build fishways. And we had a crew up to 8 staff that did this until really the 1980s. So that's the origin of our project. In recent years, a lot more work on restoration and monitoring. Here's our present crew. We have 7 full-time staff, which is really a nice contribution. Very happy to have that. When I started over 15 years ago as project leader, it was just myself, John Shepard, and Ed Clark. And we've added positions through the grace of the Sportfish license and other funding sources too. So we have a good crew. We can go out and do some small fishway projects like this one in Orleans at Pilgrim Lake. And it's really a nice opportunity to chip away at some of these projects with this staff. So we do a lot of monitoring. We focus on river herring, but we also monitor American shad, rainbow smelt, and American eel. For the talk today, I'm really going to focus on river herring, and I feel a little bit bad about that because I often like to talk about American eel, smelt, or shad, but we'll have to save that for the next presentation. And there are about 15 species of diadromous fish that occur in Massachusetts. And so, again, we focus on those 4: river herring, smelt, shad, and eel. But there's others that we do a fair amount of work. Gary Nelson obviously does a lot of work with striped bass, as does Ben Gehagen. But we like to pay attention to all these species when we can. I do want to highlight a recent achievement that came through the project, and this is the creation of a diadromous fish GIS data layer. And what this has is information on all the fish runs in Massachusetts in terms of species presence, sampling locations, some spawning locations for river herring and smelt. And it's very valuable to look at different restoration projects, the potential of these projects, and how people plan for executing these projects. This was put together last year with a lot of help from Kate Frew, as well as Kevin Robichaud with the department's GIS data layer. And so this is a tool going forward. There's a link there you can see. And this presentation will rely on this data layer for many of the graphics. Another update. Oh, there we go. I meant to say this was this data layer will connect to a survey update of all fish runs in Massachusetts, which is occurring now. This survey was last done 20 years ago. Before that, it was done in the late 1960s, and the first survey was conducted around 1920. And so we're going to update that survey, and it will be fully integrated to this GIS data layer. We also have a new policy that was produced by DP and DMF working together on stream maintenance. And I just wanted to highlight that because it's never been more important now that we're seeing lower flows. We're in a drought presently. When you have low flows, you have the propensity for these rivers to accumulate debris, as well as to have vegetation grow into the channels and obstruct fish passage. So this new policy is a tool to help us do more stream maintenance. and to work with towns. And sometimes it can be very simple. This fall is really turning out to be a trouble year for leaf jams because we have lower flows and the oak leaves just came on strong this year. So we're just seeing a lot of leaf jams in different places. And you can have really minor shoaling of sediment, which can block these fish. So you need to pay attention to these minor details, and then as well as large tree fall jams that occur every winter, and these things have to be taken care of. And so we have this new policy that'll help us work with towns and local partners to do this work. And I want to mention we do herring stocking every year. These 5 stations had stocking that occurred in 2024. We have a large stocking truck shown in the top photograph, and then we have a small stocking truck that has the ability to move small amounts of fish to difficult to access areas. So this is something we do all the time. The public really likes this type of Fish and Wildlife Service to stock shad in the Taunton River. So we have a 5-year agreement. It looks like my internet connection was unstable, so I'll just start over there. We have an agreement with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to do this work. Shad are collected in the Connecticut River, brought to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Attleboro hatchery. They're raised there, and the larvae are stocked into the Taunton River. This began in 2022 with a goal to try to stock about 3 million shad per year. The effort has exceeded 5 million shad per year each year, and we're hoping we can establish a nice catch and release recreational fishery for shad in the river. We do monitoring every year. We caught shad the first year with seining. There was shad that was stocked. With this effort, since the last 2 years, we have not caught them. So hopefully the monitoring efforts will show some improvements over time. We might expect the first fish to come back from the first year in 2025. There's our stocking truck, stocking shed in Taunton River. So let me get into the Boston Harbor region. And again, I think it's a region that has tremendous potential to restore diadromous fish. There's been a lot of activity recently, and there's a lot of potential projects that could move forward. So what this data layer does is it shows the different locations as circles where there's a fishway or a dam or some structure that intersects with their passage. And each circle has information on what is there and what could be done to improve passage. It also has information on the species present, and where it shows green, it means fish can pass. The yellow dots indicate that some work needs to be done. Red means fish cannot access those areas. So you can see a fair amount of red in this screen. So I'm going to start with the Mystic River watershed. In 2011, here's what the map looked like. There was no passage above the lower Mystic Lake, 85-acre spawning area for alewife and blueback, and work began to try to move fish up. DMF organized a bucket brigade with Chuck Roach, a local advocate, and later the Mystic River Watershed Association came involved. And that bucket brigade really just garnered a lot of political interest, and it was really just a fun thing to do. At the peak, we had over 60 people dip netting fish and getting them over the dam. It was pretty chaotic. And in our peak day, we moved 19,000 fish into the upper lake. I think this effort, which went on for a few years, really it crystallized some of this political interest to help fund the Department of Conservation and Recreation to rebuild the dam in 2012. And this included a new fishway, an eel ramp, and a fairly unique downstream migration channel to let fish move out. So great success story with just grassroots public interest to move that project forward. And so here we are in the present day. Fish can move upstream. In 2016, a fishway was installed at Center Falls Dam. And then some work was done, led by Ben Gahagan up at Horn Pond in 2018 to modify a bypass channel to let fish enter Horn Pond. So with this, there's access now to 287 acres of spawning nursery habitat where fish had not been able to get to for a very long time. Improvements in the run counts were really remarkable. And in 2017, 22, and 24, this was the top count among stations that had counting in Massachusetts. So great success story. Things should improve there as well. a new fishway is being designed and permitted for Horn Pond at the outlet, and that should even help matters further to improve passage at that location. We still have a good relationship with DCR. This year, they funded and installed a downstream migration barrier. One of the problems here is juvenile herring were going over those bays that you see there under low flow conditions, and they were getting caught up on the spillway with shallow flows, and predators were intercepting them. And so a lot of bird mortality in that spillway under certain flow conditions. And so DCR stepped up this year and purchased this boom system to try to route fish toward the low flow downstream channel. So hopefully this will work moving forward. Charles River is next. By far the biggest watershed in the Boston Harbor area. And you can see a fair amount of red in the upper watershed where fish just cannot access. It's a site where we've had a lot of work with DCR over the years at their navigation locks. There was a pretty big fish kill there this year, probably 5,000 to 10,000 fish. What happened, they were locked into the system, and when the upper gates were open, poor water quality in the basin intercepted these fish, and it resulted in a fish kill. It was a tiny fraction of the amount of fish moving up in the system. This year, I think this could have been one of the largest runs in Massachusetts, but there is an account here to document the numbers. But either way, we have work to do with DCR to try to improve the locking protocol, improve that system, to try to improve passage for not just river herring, but all diadromous fish that move up into the Charles River. The other sites are the Watertown Dam. There is a 4-foot denial there. It passes river herring okay, but not so much for other species. And so this is a dam removal target. And right now there's designs underway to look at the potential for removing the Watertown Dam. And then as you go upstream, you've got the Metropolitan Circular Dam and the Silk Mill Dam, both with no fishways. These are future restoration sites that hopefully folks will focus on and look for ways to improve passage into the upper Charles River. The Ponset River doesn't have the large spawning nursery habitats like these other sites. It's mainly main stem river, but it's an interesting site because the first dam is very tidal and fish cannot pass beyond that first dam. And so we're seeing sea level rise at this site. At least I am, and that shows you I've been around for too long. But sea levels coming up, and we're seeing conditions at lower mills here where at high tide, these riffles, which have been used for rainbow smelt for a long time, Atlantic tomcod, blueback herring, we've seen shad here. These riffles are being neutralized at high tide by the sea level rise. And so this habitat, which has been pretty functional for diadromous fish, is really losing that ability to serve as spawning habitat. So I think more and more this site is becoming a dam removal target. And I think that it's something that hopefully we can work at among partnerships. It's a difficult site. You've got contamination upstream in the riverbed. And so it's going to be an expensive project, but I think in terms of restoration potential, it has some of the highest among all projects in the region. On to the Fall River, a favorite of mine. This is a project where we started seeing alewife come into this system about 30 years ago, and we started to dream about the potential for moving them upstream. Here's how it looked last year. You had dams, the Armstrong Dam, the Ames Pond Dam, and a natural rock falls here that all limited fish moving upstream in the watershed. And so we started working with partners, and here's how things look as of this spring. The Armstrong Dam came out. Actually, this all happened this summer. The Armstrong Dam came out, the Ames Pond Dam came out, and the Rock Falls fishway was installed this summer. And so next spring, for the first time in over 200 years, we should see the ability for fish to move upstream. And you've got the 180-acre Great Pond Reservoir, over 20 acres of irrigation ponds in the golf course. You're looking at over 200 acres of improvement. If you think about this and the Mystic River watershed, you've got nearly 500 acres of spawning and nursery habitat for river herring that they have not had access to in over 200 years. So hopefully this will improve these populations. A lot of work has to be done here. This system is a water supply. That is a reservoir. We're going to have to work closely with the town of Braintree to try to find ways to make sure we can get fish in every spring. and get the juvenile herring back out again. Really a large effort. This project first saw a fishway go in at the reservoir in 2017. DMF provided these steep pass sections. The town of Braintree did the work to install the fishway, but this was really getting things ahead of the game. There was still 2 dams downstream and an impassable rock falls. So there was a lot of concern, like, okay, we're going to get to the end on this one because we've got a fishway into the reservoir, but no way for fish to move forward. It took a long time. We looked at the rock falls for years to try to find ways to get fish to move over there. We were seeing increasing numbers of alewives aggregating below this rock falls every year, and yet they couldn't pass. Eventually, we just teamed forces with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA Restoration Center, the Division of Ecological Restoration, and this partnership led to the ability to really bring in the funding to do all 3 downstream sites. And so here's the Armstrong Dam before it came out in 2023. And here's the dam being knocked down. It took about a day to take the dam out. Lots of channel work, lots of downstream modifications to the channel, but the dam came out in about a day. And then this year, a nature-like fishway went in at the rock falls, and this is just about complete now. It will be functional for next spring. So took many years to get to this point. And all along, lots of stream maintenance. You can picture a watershed where people haven't paid attention for ages for the migratory path of these fish. And there were lots of locations where vegetation had grown in, had changed the natural course of the river. And so we had to do a lot of work with locals to try to just open up this passageway to make sure that next spring fish will be able to get up. And I feel like we're at that position right now. And so we're all very excited to see what happens next spring in the Fall River watershed. Moving down to Weymouth, here's the Back River watershed. This one's a little bit different, lots of structures. There's over 15 locations in our priority list, the GIS data layer. 7 of these are structural fishways. And what you have is 60 feet of elevation change from the tide up to Whitman's Pond, which is a huge rise. These 7 fishways help make up that elevation change and get these fish into the pond. It's a 214-acre pond that has surprisingly high productivity in terms, if you look at run counts, in terms of spawning acres, it's about 1,500 fish per acre of productivity. For example, the state of Maine uses a figure of 235 fish per acre to support the sustainable fishery management plans for river herring. So this number is quite a bit higher than that. I can't really explain why. Some of it is fantastic stewardship by the local herring wardens to maintain these fishways, but it is interesting how this urban setting has this higher productivity for river herring. Fish cannot reach Great Pond, and they're blocked off by 2 dams, but more importantly, there's almost no flow. Right now, there's no flow coming out of the Mill River. It is a water supply for the town of Weymouth. Right now, we're working with the town of Weymouth. We've drafted a plan to do a feasibility study to look at moving fish up to Great Pond. The town is interested in leading that study and is seeking funding right now. This is a job for a future crew. It's going to take a lot of feasibility studies to determine if it is in fact possible, and then a fair amount of work to get fish in and out of the system. So this is a future job that hopefully may come to fruition at some point. And again, very high productivity. Here's a photo not that long ago of probably 100,000 fish in the tidal zone before the first fishway. So lots of productivity, and again, tremendous stewardship by the local herring wardens. Here's a graph showing the counts, the spring spawning run counts in the Back River. And this line here is your time series mean, first quartile. And what you can see is there was some drought occurrences in Massachusetts around 2000, 2002, and this led to some very low levels in most of our runs. And that came about at the time of the harvest ban for recreational harvest in these coastal runs. And this run shows a typical pattern we saw of improvements after the harvest ban, probably pulling out of the drought conditions as well. And so this led to some enthusiasm. Since that period, around 2014 to 2019, things have trended down a little, but this run has been fairly consistent, 200, 300, 400,000 fish. Again, encouraging to see this in a very urban setting. Next, the Weir River in Hingham. This site doesn't have the large spawning nursery habitats that the other sites have. It actually only 20 acres are available to fish at 2 fishways that DMF built, and we just recently reconstructed these 2 fishways. So this one has less restoration potential. These upstream ponds that you see here, very difficult to get fish up here given the reduced flow. The water supply here depends on groundwater, and this groundwater withdrawals influence surface flows. And so these upper channels are really degraded by wetland plant growth, debris jams. There's still a lot going on that are going to make it very difficult to bring fish back. But this could be a future interest if we can try to find ways to leave more water in the surface water flows. This site had a big smelt egg kill when they reconstructed the Foundry Pond Dam in 1998. And this led to a DMF project to build basically two smelt channels and an island below the dam. This was done in 2012 as part of the Hubbaline restoration effort. And this project had about $40,000 price tag for design and permitting, about a $40,000 price tag for construction. And I think it's helped. We found smelt spawning in here, but again, we have sea level rise really neutralizing these spawning riffles at higher tides. And so we're hoping this can become a future dam removal target, which may be one of the few ways to really help that species in this setting of really increasing tidal amplitudes and depths at some of these tidal areas. Again, another site that needs a ton of stream maintenance. We worked really hard out there from 2018 to 22 to try to allow fish to get to Triphammer Pond. We think the passageway is open, but it's going to always be threatened by lower flows, which allows these plants to grow back in. So it's another site where it's going to take a lot of local maintenance to keep fish passage up. So if I'm talking about Boston Harbor, I do want to mention rainbow smelt. It is the center of their abundance. It's a fish the public cares about. It has much importance as a shore-caught food fish. Even in the present day, there's little pockets of recreational fishing activity that occur. And also, there's been 3 mitigation projects in the region to help restore smelt spawning habitat, and 2 included daylighting projects. And as far as I'm aware, these are the only similar projects for rainbow smelt in the range of this species. So I want to touch on those. Again, higher abundance years ago, big fisheries used to occur. There's an anecdote of the Charles River of 100 years ago of over 1,000 anglers on the Cambridge side of Charles River shoreline fishing for smelt on one day. So used to have big fisheries. The numbers are down, and we know this is a species that is limited by climate change, both warming as a cold water fish, and also this problem of having the sea level come up and impacting the spawning areas where dams limit the movement of tide upstream. So Pembroke Quincy had a big egg kill that occurred quite a long time ago. It was due to the construction of a flood control tunnel where they shut the flow off. They weren't supposed to, but they did. Millions of smelt eggs were already set and they died. And so we went out, did a fish kill investigation. We estimated losses of adult fish, and penalties were assessed. $150,000 penalties were assessed, which $75,000 was put aside for future restoration in the brook. It took a long time for this to happen. There was other permits that were required for different types of projects in the downtown Quincy area. So this supplemented the funds needed to do a daylighting project where they opened up 200 feet of smelt spawning habitat in Town Brook. This was constructed in 2013. And our little pool of $75,000 was used the next year to modify a culvert upstream of this so that flood flows would be diverted to the flood control tunnel, but not dry weather flows, which was happening. So we augmented a diversion weir in this culvert to send more water back to the brook. So it's a very specifically engineered project to try to come up with slopes, water depths, velocity, substrate type for smelt spawning. And we think it can be a model for maybe future projects like this. And here's the one done in Smelt Brook in Weymouth. This goes further back to a mitigation requirement from the 1994 DMF letter when they built the Greenbush train line station in Weymouth. They had to do some mitigation money was put aside to do a smelt daylighting project that was not constructed until 2018. So this could be a case study as to why it took so long and how it happened, but either way, it was constructed and it came out nice. Again, it was an engineered project to provide smelt spawning riffles. And we went out the next year and did some work to try to document if the forecasted velocities, depths were reached, and they were, and we found smelt spawning immediately in this open channel. And so we think it was successful. These three projects to enhance smelt habitat, I think, can be a tool going forward to help the species that's absolutely threatened by climate change, both as a cold water fish, but also having habitat limitations in these coastal areas where they have dams in the tidal zone. So if we look at the region as a whole, through our diadromous fish restoration priority list, and we combine these by major coastal areas, got the North Shore and Boston Harbor together. And right at the top of the list, you've got 5 projects that I just talked about in the Boston Harbor region. And so these are highly scored projects. And the good news is, projects get finished. So the 4 river projects are done. They move off the list. We'll restructure the rankings this winter, and you'll see other projects move up. I think the Neponset River Baker Dam project will come very high to the top and hopefully get its due as people look for the next restoration projects to tackle. So let me shift to the river herring stock assessment. As most of you know, we do a lot of work with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. This is the interstate body that manages these migratory fish. And they conduct or they develop interstate fishery management plans for many species, including several diadromous fish. They also require sustainable fishery management plans for individual rivers or watersheds for river herring. And they conduct stock assessments on many species, including river herring, striped bass, American eel, American shad, sturgeon. And so DMF staff participates in these processes. Shad was conducted recently, American eel. River herring was conducted this past year. Ben Gahagan sat on the stock assessment subcommittee. I've served in the past with American eel stock assessments. Gary Nelson serves on the striped bass. So a large effort by DMF staff overall to participate with Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. So they just finished up the river herring stock assessment. I wanted to touch on that. It's the second benchmark for river herring. The first was in 2012, so not a very deep history of assessing the stock. It's fairly new. And so I think we can look forward to improvements with every time this comes around. The next update will be in 5 years, and every 10 years, they're going to endeavor to do a full benchmark. This time, there was a big effort to refine existing abundance trend series and mortality estimates. And overall, river herring remain a data poor species. I think all these diadromous fish are data poor. There are few true biological reference points, and there's few data series that go back to the 60s and 70s when landings really declined for river herring. So it is an assessment that should just keep getting better. For now, it's based on limited information. In terms of stock structure, individual rivers were the primary stock unit. But in most cases, they pool the data based on genetic information from Reed et al. 2018 into larger East Coast regions. And this is what the analyses were done on. There were attempts to separate alewife from blueback herring, but in many cases, they had to combine the species because the data at a river level was not specific enough. In terms of fishery independent data, mostly based on net surveys in rivers and spawning run counts. And the assessment reviewed data series for 105 stocks in 84 rivers. And for this data, they used trend analyses, and they depended on Mann-Kendall and ARIMA models. And when available, they used biological data to assess metrics on length, age, and mortality. There were 3 catch age models. One was developed by Gary 2011 for the Monument River in Bourne, Massachusetts. And this allows enhanced ability to look at demographics in terms of forecasting age 3 abundance and other parameters that should help improve the stock assessment. The assessment has 3 of these, and it was very much something the peer review panel promoted, as hoping that more of the trend series can evolve into more robust catch and age models. So for results, fairly unexciting, really. No clear coastwide trend since 2009, which is the reference year, and the stock was depleted relative to historic levels. So no real surprises. The last update had some significant positive trends in some of the data series, and that was really coming off the drought, I think, speaking for Massachusetts, and having the post-harvest ban impact led to some significant trends. Most of those had leveled off, and we had non-significant trends with this last benchmark. For alewife, there were 52 data series looked at, and there were no significant negative trends, but only 4 significant positive trends. And all these were in Maine, where there's been a lot of restoration activity. So fairly flat response since 2009 with this assessment. Overall, most of the abundance trends indices for alewife and blueback had a greater than 50% probability of being higher than 2009. So you might think I'm being an optimist by even putting this up here, because that's not a very great achievement. But at the same time, I think it shows not many trends were going down significantly, and some of these trends still have shown some improvement since 2009, that reference year. With mortality, that's not the case. More than half the indices had a greater than 50% probability of having higher Z than the reference point in the assessment. So something to work on. Mortality is difficult. They use age 5+ for herring, and some, when you have a lot of restoration, you can have some really high recruitment of individual cohorts, and that can be difficult and can result in higher mortality estimates. So this is something that a longer term stock assessment should gain some more strength as we get some more years and more trend indices and more runs with better information. The peer review came out and said that the stock assessment was based on the best available science. They approved the stock assessment. But again, the river herring stock remains depleted on the East Coast with flat trends since the reference year. The assessment did give a lot of attention to ocean mortality. I thought this was really good. There was a lot of discussion at both the assessment level, the board review, and the peer review on what does it mean for bycatch and ocean mortality. And the peer review made a big pitch for sentinel populations monitoring, where you have more than just a single life stage index. You combine biological data with standardized methods. And this is something that Massachusetts has really invested in starting about 15 years ago. So I felt it was good to see that for our efforts, but also to see it promoted for other states to try to improve that. And they're also pitching for more catch and age models. Well, right now we just have the 3. Ocean bycatch, I don't want to go into great detail on this, but again, very encouraging to see the attention given to this topic in the stock assessment and the subsequent board review and peer review panel. And the good news is that removals are declining recently. The last 3 years had only 91 metric tons annually versus much higher amounts before that. And this is thought to be due to lower effort in the Atlantic herring and mackerel fisheries. So good news to see the discussion, and good news to see the recent lower amounts. So let me focus in now on Massachusetts contributions to the stock assessment. There were 29 river herring counts considered among Massachusetts counts. These 6 here are the sentinel stations that have both spawning run counts and biological metrics in the length, age, and mortality. And those arrows show the trend from the last assessment. You can see most of those are going sideways or neutral, no significant trends either way. The Mystic River, the Nemasket River were going up, and that's because I think in part the Nemasket River, this concluded in 2021. The Nemasket River has gone down since then. And then you can't see too much more except for mortality. It was interesting to see 3 of these sites were going down. I didn't really expect that. The Nemasket River was going up. But similar to the East Coast wide trends. Most of these are neutral or no significant trends in recent years. All good news was that the stock assessment accepted 5 new indices, spawning run counts at these 5 rivers. No biological data. These are sites that have just the spawning run counts, but these entered into a level of duration and data quality where they were accepted for this benchmark. So hopefully we can add to these and add new sites with the next update or benchmark afterwards. So now let me transition into all of our counts in Massachusetts. So we have about 45 rivers that had a count in 2024, and that number's been somewhat stable in recent years. Most of these are volunteer visual counts, but we're seeing an increasing number in what we call, well, we used to call it census quality, but really these are high-tech or electronic or video stations, and we're seeing that number rise. We committed to trying to get stations with biological sampling at each of the major coastal drainage areas in 2012. We met that goal in 2016. We now have 8 stations that sample biological data. That's a lot of sampling, a lot for our field staff, a lot for our age and growth staff to handle all those samples. So big effort from DMF to try to get these sentinel stations. So here's the graph that shows the different so-called high-tech stations, electronic and video stations. First, I'm going to show the 7 electronic stations that DMF manages. And then here's 5 additional electronic stations that are managed by mainly the Buzzards Bay Coalition in the Buzzards Bay region. So you can see a fair amount of coverage there with Smith Root Electronic. And then there's been a recent increase in partner stations for video, and you can see lots of locations now are not just volunteer visual counts. Fairly strong coverage for electronic and video stations in Massachusetts. If we add in our sentinel stations, you can see where we're collecting biological data, both at video and electronic stations. And then we have 2, the Merrimack River Lift, as well as the Nebraska River Volunteer Visual Station, where we take biological samples there as well. So really decent coverage in Massachusetts for this, and it's taken a lot of work to get there. I don't know if we can add to this. We'd like to talk about this. We're going to hold a workshop in February at our New Bedford lab to talk about counting video, electronic, and volunteer visual, and just try to look towards the future. There's been a lot going on with AI processing of video, and that has some promise for the future. So we want to have a workshop to really think about this and see what we can do to augment what we have and how we can better support the stock assessment. Okay, here's the graph that shows a combination of 4 stations that we have that have over 20 years of data. And so what this does, it's 4 stations, and so there's a lot happening outside of these 4 stations, but it shows pretty well the decline that occurred during a drought period around 2000 to 2002. And this prompted management action to shut down a river-based harvest in 2005. And then you can see some improvements after that. And this process may have driven some of the positive trends that were seen with the stock assessment update last time. And then you can see some choppy response after that. 2019 was a big year all over Massachusetts, large numbers, and we've kind of come down from that. And so the stock assessment stopped in 21. So it's not really seeing these latest 3 years, which have stepped down from what we saw here. Now here's an individual river, the Mattapoisett River. And I put this one up there because it shows really well the response, or what we think may have been the response in the drought years. Just large decline in its population to very low numbers of fish, and it stayed that way. Very modest response after the harvest ban. People got a little bit excited here, and the numbers have come right back down. In 2021, 22, just a couple thousand fish in this river that once had harvests of a couple 100,000 fish just 40, 50 years ago. It was a site that had really a popular and well-managed harvest in the 60s and 70s and even in the 80s. And so something has changed dramatically. This site has puzzled us for years, but I think it's becoming more and more apparent that the water supply operations, mainly groundwater wells, are just not allowing a lot of surface flows when these juvenile herring need to exit. I was out at this site last week. This photograph is from a different year, but it looks very similar. There's almost no flow in the river presently. There's no flow leaving the major spawning nursery habitat. So we think this is probably a big part of the puzzle, is that this river, under average conditions, doesn't really have enough flow to get juveniles out, and under drought conditions, they cannot leave. So it has to be a big part of the problem in the Mattapoisett River. Here's the Nemasket River. This site has an approved sustainable fishery management plan. The spawning target's down here. And what it is quite simply, it's 10% of the time series mean. And again, you can see that decline after the drought. A very nice response occurred after that. And then we've had some real choppy numbers. And in fact, the last 3 years have been so bad that the harvest plan says if they are below the 25th percentile 3 consecutive years, the fishery has to shut down. So this run has not been open. The local herring commission has decided not to have a harvest. So they have permission, but they haven't had a harvest. Now they can't open with those 3 years below the 25th percentile. So the plan is working, but it's not really the way we'd like to see things. So this is a site that is connected, I think, to the southern New England, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Narragansett Bay, Buzzards Bay. That region overall has not been performing that well. And there's some really tough stories in that region in terms of really low run counts in recent years. Here's the Monument River. I mentioned the catch and age model that's produced here. Fascinating site. One of the oldest, if not the oldest, electronic count for river herring on the East Coast, goes back to the early 1980s. It's a site that shows tremendous fluctuation. It doesn't have the consistency that some sites have. This run seems to go up and down. And so we can see that similar response to the drought years, and then a choppy response after that. Had one really nice year recently, over 500,000 fish. Came down after that, and then we've had this modest improvement in the last couple of years. But a lot of attention to the Monument River. It's got one beautiful park that is a great example of a park where people can go see the fish, get close to the fish. We're having a meeting on December 5th with a downstream property owner that owns a large fishway at the Cape Cod Canal. And the property owner is interested in just talking big and thinking about, can we make a park down here to give access to the public to see these fish, as well as support and enhance this really important run downstream. So a lot of management interest here, and we're hoping that we can really make some improvements to the run and public access in the near future. So here I've clustered 3 sites that have had a lot of restoration activity. The red line is the Mystic River. I mentioned the fishway that went in 2012. There was no passage before that. Pembroke in blue is a site that had a fishway blown out, and so for several years there was no passage. DMF reconstructed a fishway there, and you can see some nice response after that. Both these sites, in my opinion, have shown the strongest response to any restoration activities in Massachusetts in the last 15 years. And it's a real credit to all the local partners. The green line is Tombrook and Plymouth, where there's been a lot of fantastic dam removal. And you can see the response there has been modest. It is moving upward, but it is modest. And so this is going to be a really interesting site to keep an eye on, because most of the restoration possible in the watershed has been done or will be done soon. So we're hoping to see a response there as well. This little dip here is fascinating because numbers were so high this year, and they went down from over 400,000 to about 40,000 2 years in a row. What I think happened here is these fish didn't disappear. There was some real stream maintenance problems in these years where fish were limited in getting in. And my guess is these fish went elsewhere within the North River watershed. And so the numbers were probably low, but I don't think that those fish did not exist. They rebounded, a lot of stream maintenance conducted here. The numbers rebounded here. And so we've been above 400,000 2 years in a row. And overall, these stars show when these rivers had the top count among all counting stations in Massachusetts. So you can see the Mystic River very quickly became one of the largest runs. They had access to 85 acres of spawning nursery habitat. All of a sudden, they had an additional 287 acres, and we've seen a nice response. And then Pembroke was the top run. A year after having 40,000 fish, it came back to having about 570,000 fish in 2023. So all three of these are success stories, and there's something we're going to keep an eye on going forward. You know, historically, we had a survey done about 100 years ago, and it showed there were 17 rivers in Massachusetts that had a harvest of over 500,000 fish in that time period. So we've come a long way. Our populations are much lower than that now. We've documented these 13 rivers in the last 20 years to have over 200,000 fish in a given year. And to my eye, when you have 100,000 fish in a run, it's really exciting. The public takes notice. You see a lot of fish. 200,000 is even better. And so we've had these rivers here that have hit that number in recent years. Among these 6 here have hit 500,000. 2 of these, Herring River and Harwich, well, actually 3 of these, Herring River and Harwich, Herring Brook and Pembroke, and the Mystic River have done it very recently. So we're encouraged by this. Some of these bigger runs are showing the ability to have large numbers of fish. And the goal is to try to get more runs on this list, both in terms of over 200,000 fish as well as the 500,000 fish club. I don't want to be too optimistic. There are regions, again, that are showing some real trouble. The Buzzards Bay counts are very flat. They've been flat for a long time, not seeing a lot of things to get very excited about. And we're also seeing this on Cape Cod, primarily with these small mill ponds where the runs are artificial. The runs were created, the mill ponds were created by dams. Those mill ponds seem to be suffering from lower productivity, and we're seeing flat trends for those ponds as well as most of the region of Buzzards Bay, Narragansett Bay, and I think these conditions are also being seen further down at Rhode Island and Connecticut. So in terms of harvest plans, we've had 4 towns that have requested harvest plans in the last few years, and we've actually drafted 2 plans for the Nemasket River and for Herring River Harwich, and these plans were approved by Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. Both plans have not been executed. So far, these towns have decided not to open. Harwich is looking very closely at an opening for the spring of 2025, but so far we haven't had any harvest in nearly 20 years in Massachusetts. Pembroke requested a plan back before that decline I showed you, and we backed off processing that plan. They've again requested this past year to have that plan revisited. So we will be working on that this year, and maybe we'll have in another year or so a 3rd plan approved for Massachusetts. Okay, let me move on to restoration projects. And what I'm going to do is talk about projects that are mainly under construction and have been constructed this year. There are so many projects right now that are just in development. It's amazing. I'm working on at least a dozen. There are partners working on more than a dozen. There's a lot of money that's coming through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the NOAA Restoration Center, the Division of Ecological Restoration. A lot of federal money is working on these projects right now. I just don't have enough time to cover them all. So I'm going to talk about ones that are coming to construction or constructed. This is South River in Marshfield. There's a dam here with a little fishway that DMF built. We reconstructed this fishway, I think it was 2018, but it's always been difficult. We do electrofishing here for shad. Shad do not want to go through this fishway, and we find them right up till the fishway. And so what this project is going to do is remove the dam and then construct a nature-like Weirpool fishway below it, just to step up the elevation from the roadway to this spot. And we're really excited because we see with our electrofishing all kinds of species: sea run trout, bluebacks, shad, alewife, smelt, tomcod, white perch, lamprey. So it's really a project that could help a wide range of species. This project it has a vendor to do the work. Construction is going to start any day on this removal and fishway. Here's Stony Brook and Brewster. This is really an iconic park. So many people have come here to see herring for the first time. I've met so many people that say they remember when they were a kid and they came out to the site and saw herring for the first time. So it's a wonderful place for public access. DMF built the upstream fishways in 2011. I think our costs were under $3,000 to rebuild all these weirs. They still look beautiful. Really nice examples of nature-like fishway weirs in the upper fishway. The lower fishway, it's really an example of how these fish sometimes can exceed our expectations. They can get over these weirs. Weirs, the drops, the velocities are way higher than what you would expect river herring can navigate, but they always have. I will say, among all the sites I visit, this site seems to have some of the most beat up downrunning adult fish. So many of those fish have bruises. They I think are banged up as they launch themselves through these weirs. And so this project will rehab completely the downstream weirs, and it's being conducted. They're going to bid now, and they'll start construction this late fall. The town of Brewster, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, the Cape Cod Conservation District are conducting the project. DMF funded the notice of intent for the project last year, and we're also conducting spawning nursery habitats to try to learn more about upstream conditions. These sites do have pretty significant cyanobacteria blooms, and so we're trying to understand how that might impact these fish. But either way, really important restoration will be conducted in those downstream fishway weirs this fall and winter. Stewart Creek culvert replacement in Dennis. Here's a case where they built two culverts at Route 6A, and they were undersized. They were built under emergency orders, and so they really didn't get proper review. The culverts were undersized, and they had this really steep riprap banks along the roadway. And for 15 years, we've been pulling stones out of the culverts. They just fall on their own, and then there's really bad invasive Phragmite growth. And when those plants die off, they combine with the stones to just jam the culverts. And we've seen just numerous fish kills over the years, both adults trying to get out and juvenile herring moving out as well. So there's been endless stream maintenance to try to open these culverts up. And then in recent years, we're seeing a different kind of mortality. We're seeing otters really kill a lot of herring between the culverts. The herring get between there, and they're just not really able to squeeze through these impacted culverts. And you'll see the otters apparently kill every fish. I've seen two separate events of over 1,000 dead herring where most aren't eaten, they're just killed. And so there's a project underway right now. Mass DOT is paying for it, which is really encouraging. They recognized the limitations to their own culverts, and so this is being funded outside of any funding cycles. It's just DOT deciding to do the right thing and remove these culverts. Here's a picture I took last week of one of the head walls of the new culverts, and you can see it's going to be, instead of a 2-foot diameter undersized culvert, just a nice wide span to let these fish come and go as they need to. So really an important project that was 15 years in the making. And the work won't be done. That Phragmites isn't going anywhere. So we developed a stream maintenance plan that was approved by the Dennis Conservation Commission that will help locals get out there every year and just do what they can to manually keep that channel open. And I'm going to have one project that is not going to construction. This is the Westport River in Westport. I want to talk about that because we've got a public meeting coming up next week. There are two impassable dams here, and we had a pike net downstream for a number of years that documented really large numbers of fish in the system that were seeking to move up. And we conducted a habitat assessment of Lake Nokichoke. We found suitable habitat. So we proceeded to develop a plan with the first dam owner to develop a memorandum of understanding to allow a fishway to go forward. We got the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service involved. They conducted a survey with us, and then a design was made for that fishway. Again, the pike net caught all kinds of alewife, which we didn't expect because they have no access to spawning and nursery habitat in the form of a pond or a lake. They're blocked by both dams. We also found a fairly good number of sea-run brook trout, native trout, large white perch, and other species that were seeking to move upstream. So we decided this was a high-ranked project for the region, and we're pursuing this project. It's not an easy one. You can picture this dam here would need a fishway. The dam owner really doesn't favor removal. And so that's why this is moving towards a fishway, but it's a difficult removal, be a difficult fishway. We've contracted GZA twice in the last 3 years to both do feasibility work and then start the design work for a fishway at this site. And now we're working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the upstream dam. Again, difficult site. This pond has over 50 homes that have docks and they use the lake. So it's really not a removal target. It's a big, difficult fishway. And so U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service produced a scoping design. We did the survey with them that led to the scoping design. And now we're working with these dam owners, which is the city of Fall River, to try to find a way to advance a fishway project. And we're holding a public meeting next week at the Westport Grange. And we want to just introduce the results of the two GZA design reports and just talk to the public about this project and try to garner political support, public support to advance these two difficult fishway projects. Okay. Checking on the time, I think I better move it ahead. Harry, you let me know if I'm getting tight. I'm going to quickly go through Fishway project in 2024.
It's noon time now, Brad.
Okay, let me wrap it up with a couple slides and work we did this year. Here's 3 projects where we spent about a day in the field and to do the work. The Snuff Mill Dam up in Newbury had, you can see large root balls which were obstructing notch flow. We removed those root balls and did some concrete repairs. Here we found in the Cushnet River, there was a dam used to back up flow for a pump intake at a farm that was impacting fish passage. We notched that this year to allow fish passage at all conditions. And then here's Herring Creek in Aquina. We built them a video station upstream. They put in a new culvert downstream. And so we designed a fishway frame that would be good for fish passage as well as supporting their new video counter. And then here's Joe Holbech. He's going to be working with the Snuff Mill Dam owner to try to improve passage at that site and maybe look at this as a future dam removal site. Monument River at the Cape Cod Canal, we replaced a weir there this year. There's a series of weirs that step up the flow from the tidal zone to the motel across the street that I showed you earlier. And here's the project where we work with the Army Corps of Engineers to put this in. It was also a great site for us to use our institutional knowledge from Ed Clark to teach newer staff members how to build concrete forms. And so that process took place at the same time. And here's the completed weir. We'll return next year and do 2 or 3 weirs upstream, and hopefully in 2 years to finish that whole stretch. These weirs were built in 1938, and they were working okay, but they were really pretty degraded in terms of the concrete integrity. Depot Pond in Eastham. Here's a project where really years in development, a permit with the Conservation Commission in Eastham, a project narrative had to be prepared based on survey. In the end, it was a half a day of field work. The big problem was to get fish from this pond into Depot Pond. And there was a culvert that was really impacted by a large tree that grew on the side and it had a large root ball that went into the culvert. And so we removed that. We tried for 2.5 hours digging it out. We finally just put a come along on it, and the root ball in its entirety was over 300 pounds, massive root ball. We took that out. We dug the channel out. We added stop log board slots to manage flows leading up to the culvert. And then we dug out the downstream channel. And so that project was one of those cases where development took a fair amount of effort. The field work took a half a day and very low cost. And here's the final one I want to talk about. Herringbrook, Wings Pond, and Falmouth. We just finished this last week. This is a case where the DMF Fishway crew built 10 weirs at this site in 1975. And over time, they became degraded. Flows were going around the weirs, and fish were having trouble getting the water depth they needed to pass, given all this movement around the weirs. At the lower sites, it was also tidal flow. Tidal flow is coming up further than it ever used to, and so the tide is going around these. Our goal was to remove 3 or 4 of these, reform one of them, and then add fiber rolls to help bolster the other weirs. So here's the one concrete form. We had a great crew working with 2 staff from the town of Falmouth. It was also a really good site for us to use our excavator. We have our work truck, cement mixer, and we taught 3 of our crew how to use the excavator. So it was very much a training job that we did over 2 weeks in November. And so here we are laying down fiber rolls to help fortify the channel. We tried to take out these weirs with our excavator, and they were not budging. I guess we did a great job with the concrete years ago. So we had to go to demolition. And so we started using the demo hammer, and we used the demo hammer more. We brought everybody involved. Here's Cat Poquette with the town of Falmouth and the demo hammer. We brought in the old guys to use the demo hammer. We bought a second generator to have 2 demo hammers going, and we just kept chipping away. Here we have cranberry harvesting happening right next to us. We had to work closely with a cranberry bog farmer to make this one work. And eventually we were able to move 3 weirs this way. We did have to even deploy our concrete saw to get these things. So big physical labor job to remove these weirs that wouldn't budge with our excavator. And I have no post projects. We just finished it last week, so I have no photographs of how it looks just yet. But either way, great example of DMF working with locals. It cost $34,000 to permit this project. Our full construction cost is going to come in under $5,000. So good example of the efficiency and the partnership that our Fishway crew provides to locals to improve these fishways. So that's all I have. Gary, if there's time for questions, I'd be happy to take questions.
Well, it's 12:05, and I have to leave. So since I'm the host, I have to shut everything down. So what I'm going to do is, if anyone has any questions for Brad, you can email him at brad.chase@mass.gov. All right.
All right. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming. You got some hand clapping going on. All righty, guys. See ya.